I got to explain the next speaker a little bit for some context. We're going to be joined by Berger, who is the director of the Trusted Computing Group. You're probably aware that, as I said earlier, cloud computing and security have a lot of people concerned. And Brian has a unique perspective on this because he's actually not going to talk about cloud security directly. One of the biggest problems with cloud security is authentication and identification. Right now you have a cloud computing account. We heard in one of the panels on Monday in the Cloud Ops Bootcamp that one CIO had audited the company's credit cards to find the string Amazon Web Services and had found roughly 50 different employees putting purchases on their cards. And if you think about this, IT has always felt that the expense threshold, the number that you're allowed to sign for your own expenses, was sort of a firewall for people deploying their own services, right? I mean, if you had a $500 spending limit, you weren't really going to go buy a rack scalable infrastructure. With Amazon Web Services or other cloud offerings, you can pay a couple of bucks a month, and all of a sudden you have IT infrastructure that flies below the radar imposed by the expense report. And so there are a lot of issues with authentication. Most of the accounts these guys found were actually tied to personal email, so if the employee left, there'd be no way to do password recovery. And that information can be shared and is hard to control. And there's a problem with any time you're trying to identify someone based on something intangible, something digital. And so the Trusted Computing Group has a number of initiatives that try to make it unbelievably likely that someone is who they claim to be. So in the discussion about authenticating people for clouds, we need to look at what's going on the client side to identify someone uniquely. And Brian, who is, in addition to being the director of the Trusted Computing Group and executive at Wave Systems, is going to join us to talk a little bit about client-side authentication and guaranteeing identity as we move towards cloud computing. Brian?
Thank you. Okay, this is not the first time anybody said they had to explain what I was going to talk about. So my contact information is here if you want to take note of that and contact me anytime. It's not at the end, so here it is at the onset. So I'm going to talk a little bit about standards, trusted computing, and security, some of the stuff that was talked about earlier today. And I like to say it in this way, that computing has left the building. And in the context of users have left the building, the applications have left the building, they're sitting up in the cloud. And what do we really need to consider in that context when things have left the building around authentication, the access to the data, the access to the application? So the Trusted Computing Group was formed about 5 years ago, and we concentrate on building specifications and standards for hardware-based security. One of the implementations of specifications that's been internationalized is around the trusted platform module. And this is a hardware cryptographic device that's put into PCs today, the commercial-based PCs. About 300 million of them have shipped, and most of the enterprises have them today. They're supported by the operating systems that are out there. They're actually specified as a authentication token or as a storage location for security and cryptographic information based on data protection, access control, network security. And these become a foundation for what we like to talk about is machine authentication to services or applications. And that becomes very important when you want to identify your users or your machines to a cloud service or to an application service. And the criticality about that is really understanding who you're doing business with, or who has access to the information, or who has access to the data. And based on compliance and a lot of the legal requirements today around data protection, and a lot of the news we see about data breaches and losses of information, IDs, passwords, social security numbers, et cetera, having that relationship with a client in a very secure way is critically important. So I talked about this a little bit, but there are a lot of reasons for machine authentication. Tying your users or multiple users to an application or to a client side, and then authenticating them up to a service in the factors of both who the user is, and is the machine a machine that is recognized by the service provider or the service or the cloud itself, is pretty important. And layering that on top of, do I have multiple users on multiple clients? What clients are they using? Do I know who's actually accessing the data or the service that I'm providing to these users in a true corporate environment? So I'm not talking about the consumer here. Is a really important methodology. And as we see our customers, so I can speak a little bit on the behalf of what I do on a daily basis outside of this volunteer job with TCG, is I work with large enterprise customers, and they're buying solutions from us around protecting their data, protecting their access to corporate information, whether it's hosted in a data center or hosted in the cloud or behind the firewall. And their true interest is recognizing the machines and the access so that they have true control. And they want to start moving their applications up to the cloud. And that's perfectly okay from our perspective, because we're really concentrated on the user and the machine getting access to the information. And as that becomes an importance in the cloud environment, where these applications are being held in a public or hybrid environment, knowing who's getting access to the service, getting access to the data, if data is being hosted by a third party up in a cloud, it's critically important to have that authentication capability. So a little bit of a use case. I don't have a lot of slides for you today, so it's real simple and easy. What we've done is we started developing a very basic application for restricting access by machine basis to a particular service, whether it's an HR application or a finance application or Salesforce automation, like Salesforce.com or something of that nature, using OpenID, SAML, or Federation, and allowing a multi-user environment to access that service. And so that we start to look at a model of machines are known to machines, so that the service is known, has a recognition of a machine that's authorized to get access to that service. And then the users are known to the particular machine or multiple machines that are allowed to get access to that service as well. And this use case starts to roll up into, if I have an application or hosted application or cloud service that's out and available, can I recognize my machines or my users on those machines and their critical information or identities that are tied to those? So as a last slide, which I can barely see, so it's probably harder for you guys as well, we've stood up a beta service that's free for people to come and take a look at. And what this does is it starts to bind, and we've used OpenID as the authentication mechanism to bind that OpenID down to the client platform using the TPM. So we have a cryptographic binding to the identity of the user down to the machine. So we now release a machine identity up to a third-party service. That third-party service can arbitrate between the application or the web service and provide a authentication based on the user's credentials and the machine's credentials to allow access to that server or that service. And this is a really interesting capability because it starts to extend what OpenID as an authentication mechanism, which is supported by tens of thousands of application providers today, into a true hardware-based authentication model based on client authentication. So that's the short version. I think I'm well under time. Yes, I am. And I'm open to questions about, I guess away from here, about Trusted Computing Group and what Wave is doing and how it can extend to your cloud service interests. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Brian.